All right, it's 3:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is Bonnie McFarland, and I want to welcome you today to our second part of our LCAP workshop. Our last one was on February 5th, and if you weren't able to join us for that one, you can get the link to it. And Evan, I believe, posted the link in our in our chat box to today's slides. So with us today are all our team. We have Rachel Garcia, Amy Tomamatsu, Adrian Balcazar, Jeannie Keith, and Evan Bartelheim, and you'll be hearing from all of them, I believe, in that order today. As we have up on the screen is the agenda from our last meeting, which was on the 5th. And at that time, as you know, we broke this training into two parts. First part being basics. So as you can see, we went over the LCAP template, all the components of the new template, the timeline, the approval process, and all that information is posted along with the recording of the website and handouts on our website. So if you missed it or want to go back again, it was sort of a very full agenda. We went over the entire LCAP with all the changes. So today, we're going to take a look at a little more in-depth look at a few sections of the LCAP. We particularly want to focus on identifying metrics and outcomes, particularly given some of the challenges around that this year. Want to focus also on clear, comprehensible actions, which is often we see as a challenge in LCAPs, and then focus on the requirement to identify needs, conditions, and circumstances for individual student groups, and that requirement which was added to the LCAP recently. And then we'll focus on the increased and improved services requirements. And then finally, we'll give you a preview of the new eLCAP system. As I said, this is our second, and this we don't have any full group trainings scheduled at this time, but we will add any as things change or maintain communication with you as things change. As you know, they have been over the last year. So we also, you should have, someone in your district should have received an email from your LCAP coordinator contact, inviting you to contact them to provide you support, individual support at your district. We find that's the best support, is for our coordinators to work directly with you. We can provide information in these kind of settings, but when they actually set an appointment and work with you, that's when the real work takes place, and they can respond to questions and support your needs. So, and as for questions, please put them in the chat. As usual, we will follow up with a Q&A for you. The other Q&A is ready to go out, and you should get that by tomorrow. But this one, we will answer your questions and also get that out to you. So before we go ahead into some of the details, we kind of wanted to just do a little overview of how preparing for this new 3-year LCAP, a few reminders and a few things you might want to consider as you get ready to approach this work. So first of all, to start with, let's take a look at what is the 3-year LCAP, and it is the new LCAP you're going to submit this June is going to be a new 3-year LCAP for the period of 2021 through 23-24. And this is going to be the first year that LEAs will be using the new template that was approved in January of 2020, because that wasn't used last year because we didn't have an LCAP. Just another reminder, the learning continuity and attendance plan that you submitted for this year was somewhat different, in fact, significantly different than your typical LCAP, because it was designed to address how student learning continuity would be addressed during the COVID-19 crisis for this school year. So it had a very different focus. Now we're sort of back to where we were with the LCAP that addresses goals, outcomes, actions, and associated expenditures for all students in the 8 state priorities. So we're back to focusing on those state priorities and how the LEA is going to increase or improve services for the unduplicated pupil groups as compared to all students and in proportion to the additional funds generated by those students. So this is sort of back to your traditional LCAP. But really this LCAP is going to represent more of a transition sort of back to normal, or maybe a new normal for school programs. So we know things are constantly changing, and things aren't back to normal yet, but they are headed in that direction, and the LCAP is the first step to get there. So let's just take a look, just as a reminder, at what's changed in the last 3 years since you did your last LCAP. So I took a look back to see what was going on in 2017 when you wrote your last 3-year LCAP. Well, that was the year we had President Trump inaugurated in January of that year. That was also the year of the great solar eclipse. That was a total eclipse. Some of you may remember that. And the next one is coincidentally due in 2024, when your next LCAP, 3-year LCAP, will be due. So I don't know if the solar eclipse is matching our LCAP cycle, but it certainly seems to. In 2017, if you look back for what were the big issues of the year, the opioid epidemic was the biggest health story in the country. That was topping the news. And at that time, we had a different state superintendent. Tom Torlakson was our superintendent. And that, which the next one surprised me, it's been that long, but the California dashboard wasn't launched until 2017. It was approved in January, launched in December of that year. And also ESSA had just been approved and passed in 2015. So California was just submitting its first state plan under ESSA that year. And then there are some things that never changed. Tom Brady was still in the Super Bowl on the winning team, but he was with the New England Patriots. So there were some things that were a little bit different. But you can see a lot of things have changed in the world since then. But a lot of things have changed for schools too. Let's look at the next slide. And for schools, a lot has changed in the last 3 years, but the movement has been accelerated in the past year. The changes have been huge. What you've had to face, what you've dealt with over the past year. The issues highlighted by COVID and school closures are not going to go away. And so as you write this LCAP, when we say back to normal, well, it's you know that the issues we faced, whether it's learning loss for all our students and student groups, are still going to be there. Achievement gaps that have been exacerbated by school closures will need to be a focus of our work. So it's changed the way that the context in which we're operating right now. So that's got to be a part of your thinking as you move forward. While we may have the pandemic, if not under control, at least a light at the end of the tunnel, the work for schools is going to remain, and there's a heavy lift there. So let's take a look at what we've learned and what's changed. Just a reminder of a couple things that have probably changed in your lives. And first of all, parent and family engagement. Parents have, in the past year, become, and many people have seen that, become more engaged because school decisions have had a greater and more immediate impact on their lives. And in addition to that, they've had greater access to virtual meetings. We've heard districts say we used to have 5 or 10 parents show up at a meeting. Now we have 500 parents showing up at a meeting. So that's a significant change and something you want to keep in mind in terms of, again, the LCAP's about transparency, and parents are more engaged, asking more questions and more concerned and more into the details of what school is offering. The next thing I think that we've learned is about student needs. Through online learning, we've had a greater window into the lives of students and gained a greater understanding of their needs, their circumstances, barriers to success. Teachers have been in the living rooms of families, and they've seen firsthand some of the challenges. So while we may have known them at one level, now teachers and other counselors and school staff have really seen those needs and internalized them, and that has implications for our LCAP. Next is the area of technology. We've learned a lot about the value of technology and also the limitations in supporting student learning. And we anticipate that will go into your thinking as you're developing your LCAP. What's the effective use of technology? What have we learned? What are the limits? And along with that, we've learned the value and the importance of in-person instruction. In-person instruction we found is important, that teachers, counselors, that direct contact has become critically important. And I think we all knew that at one level, but it's become more vivid and more sort of not only in individual school settings, but I think as a country, what we hear a lot is about the importance teachers play and how students can't get the same results from an online, from a computer as they can from a teacher, the time a counselor spends with them. And then funding, we're going to likely be faced with some significant increases in federal and state funding to support our work, and we need to think about how we're going to use that wisely. All right. So next, let's take a look at some considerations, how these play out for your LCAP and some things you might want to be thinking about. First of all, how is the new LCAP going to reflect today's needs for your schools? Okay, so all the things we just talked about, how will those be part of your thinking as you look at what do your schools need today and moving forward for the next year? And then how are you going to use the annual update of the 2019-20 LCAP to help your schools reflect, your staff, your parents, your stakeholders, reflect on where the LEA was prior to and at the time of school closures? So what was going on then? Where were we? Where was your school? Where was your district at that time? And then when you look at the 2021 annual update, that's going to focus on your learning continuity plan. So how can you use that to help your district or your LEA focus on what's been learned over the last period of school closures? What are the things we've learned that we want to take forward? Another question is how learning loss over the past year impact your outcomes moving forward. Do the outcomes you had before still make sense? Do you have ground you need to make up? What does that look like? What do you want to provide as a vision 3 years moving forward for your community about your outcomes? And then what additional needs, conditions, or circumstances of your 3 targeted groups, low-income students, your English learners, and foster youth, what new needs have been identified that are barriers for success? We knew them before, but now we know them at a deeper level, and other needs have arisen as you've gotten to see them in their homes. And then what unmet needs have been identified for other student groups? You have other student groups who also have faced challenges. What have you learned about those students? And then what additional temporary state and federal funds that are targeted to COVID support, which of those are going to be included in the new plan? All right. So let's look at those. Let's look at the additional. So LEAs are already receiving what we're hearing, that's called ESSER 2 and Gear 2 funds, and we certainly have more possibility of funding on the way. Also, some additional state funds may become available. It keeps being on again, off again, but they may be available to address learning loss specifically. These are all funds that are to address COVID-related issues. Okay. And because the learning continuity plan was focused on COVID-related issues, LEAs were required to include some of that federal and state learning loss mitigation funds. But these aren't LCFF funds, and currently there's no requirement for you to include these additional funds in your LCAP. So this is an individual LEA decision. And these are not included in meeting the increased or improved services requirement, because that's LCFF funds need to be a part of that. But the question is, do you include these to give a full picture of all the services that you're providing, or do you want to pull those out separately? It's just something you need to consider, and it's a district decision. Some other things just we wanted to remind you is about the LCAP supporting all student groups. And the LCAP is about providing goals, actions, and services for all students to achieve in the 8 state priorities. And accountability for ensuring student achievement for all student groups is a part of California's accountability system. And the California dashboard provides disaggregated data so we can focus on the groups with achievement gaps. And LEAs are identified for differentiated assistance based on student group accountability. So LEAs have a basic responsibility for meeting the needs of all student groups. And in addition, we're subject to civil rights requirements to ensure equal access for certain groups of students, special need and English learner students. We say all that to take a look at some of the myths and facts that have come up around various student groups. So let's take a look at those just to review some of the myths. These are some things we've heard from people. We get questions and comments that people say, and one is that services for ethnic groups and students with disabilities can't be included in the LCAP. This usually isn't by LCAP writers, but sometimes we hear that from people in the community. They tell us it can't be in there. And that is a myth. It's not accurate. The LCAP should include goals, actions, and services for all students and all student groups. So the LCAP is a plan for all your students. Another thing we hear is we have a large number of, name the group, but maybe students with disabilities, and a lot of them are low income. So any action for those students can contribute to the increased or improved services requirement. Again, that is a myth. And to meet the increased or improved service requirement, we're reminded in the LCAP that the action needs to be designed based on the needs, the conditions, and circumstances of one of the three targeted groups, either low-income students, ELs, or foster youth. Okay? So if an action is about a child's disability, that is a special ed need. Whereas if it's to meet the increased or improved needs of low-income students, say, then, and you want to provide it district-wide, then low-income students would be the need. Other students could participate, but it's designed based on the needs of one of these groups. Some other myths, just a couple others, are that all services for low-income ELs and foster youth are contributing to the increased or improved services requirement. Again, that's not accurate. To be included as an increased or improved service, the service has to demonstrate that it's increased or improved compared to services for all students. And we need to remember that low-income children, English learners, foster youth are included in the all student group. So if something's provided to all, that they need to have access to that service. You can't say, no, we're just going to provide the only services those three groups get are from the increased or improved services portion. They're entitled to all services. They're part of the all students. So what's increased or improved beyond that? Then the last one we look at is, we hear this and we see this in LCAPs. We see it in many, in fact, I would say most LCAPs. This is reflected that all unduplicated pupils have the same needs, so we'll just include all of them. We see UDPs all the time. UDPs for this, or UDPs have this need. Well, low-income students, foster youth, and English learners each face unique needs and each face unique conditions and circumstances that impact them. And the LCAP should include specific actions based on the identified needs of each group. Just to say they're all UDPs is not a student group, okay? Each of them should be addressed separately. So just a few myths and facts we wanted to clear up before we move forward. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who's going to look at metrics and outcomes.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Bonnie mentioned, in this next section, we're going to be taking a look at the metrics and outcomes. Next slide, please. So here we see a screenshot from the LCAP template, which shows the measuring and reporting results table that is embedded within the goals and actions section. And for each LCAP year, LEAs must identify the metrics that they will use to track progress towards the expected outcomes. And as Bonnie mentioned, the LCAP should include all students and all student groups. And the instructions also specify that LEAs are encouraged to identify metrics for specific student groups as appropriate, including expected outcomes that would reflect narrowing of any existing performance gaps. For the 2021-22 LCAP, LEAs must complete the metrics, baselines, and desired outcomes for 2023-24. The sections for year 1, year 2, and year 3 outcomes will not be completed this year. One of the key questions that has come up is, what data do we use for the 2021-22 LCAP? And CDE has indicated that in the absence of state and local indicators within the dashboard, LEAs will need to use available state and local data and stakeholder input to identify metrics, baselines, and desired outcomes for goals. Next slide, please. The 8 LCFF priorities are addressed within state and local indicators. This slide highlights data that is traditionally available to LEAs through the dashboard, whether populated by CDE or by local indicator reporting. And this year is a little bit different in that the lack of data traditionally received from CDE requires LEAs to take a closer look and reflect on what local data LEAs have available to measure progress. And in the next few slides, we'll be taking a deeper look at the required metrics and some of those data sources. Next slide, please. So at a minimum, the LCAP must address all LCFF priorities and associated metrics. However, keep in mind that this is the minimum and there is no limit to the number of metrics an LEA may choose to use to measure progress in meeting goals and addressing priorities. Here we see state priorities 1, 2, and 7, along with the required metrics for each of these state priorities. All 3 of these are also local indicators. So for these state priorities, LEAs are encouraged to use metrics based on or reported through the relevant self-reflection tools for local indicators within the dashboard. And as a reminder, beginning this year, LEAs are required to present the local indicators to the local governing board at the same meeting in which the LCAP is adopted. So the local indicator process should really inform the development of the LCAP. And we've also included the link to the CDE's local indicators webpage where you can access the self-reflection tools for the local indicators. And so that's included at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Priority 4, pupil achievement, is probably the one that LEAs will find the most challenging due to unavailable metrics such as the CASP and LPAC, which are noted in red on this slide. For these metrics, LEAs will need to consider the intent of the metric and use one or more local measures that meet this intent to establish baselines and desired outcomes. So for example, the purpose of the CASP is to measure student progress in English language arts and literacy, math, and science. Since the CASP assessments were suspended in 2020, LEAs will need to use one or more comparable local assessments of student progress in ELA, math, and science as a metric to establish baselines and desired outcomes. For the other required metrics in priority 4, some data may be accessed through DataQuest or CalPads, or through the LEA student information system. An LEA may also have its own additional metrics to measure success in some of the areas highlighted in pupil achievement. It's also important to note that although data might not be available for the LCAP as written in the spring of 2021, more data will become available over the next 3 years, and LEAs can add that data into the LCAP as it rolls out. Next slide. Here we see state priorities 3, 5, and 6. The metrics in red are not available this year via data quests. So LEAs will need to use local absence data and local suspension data for these metrics. For priority 3, parent involvement, a new self-reflection tool was developed a couple of years ago to support LEAs with reporting on this local indicator. And priority 6, school climate, includes both state and local indicators. Local measures include local climate surveys that LEAs administer to measure perceptions of school safety and connectedness. Next slide. So here is a screenshot of a measuring and reporting results tool that is available to support LEAs with the measuring and reporting results section of the LCAP. And thank you to Evan for updating this resource for us. This tool includes the required metrics for each of the state priorities and also identifies the data source for each required metric. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, for the 2021-22 LCAP, LEAs must complete the metrics, baseline, and desired outcomes for 2023-24. The sections for year 1, year 2, and year 3 outcomes, again, will not be completed this year. Those sections will be left blank. So just some reminders for the metric column include explaining the metric for readers and identifying the data source. You'll also want to specify the reporting period for any point in time metrics, as well as include local measures in lieu of any state measures that are currently not available. For baseline data, LEAs must use the most recent data available at the time of adoption of the LCAP. For metrics not available from 2020, you can include 2019 data in addition to a local measure. And finally, for the desired outcomes for 2023-24, consider where you want to be in 3 years. Next slide, please. So here are just some questions to consider when selecting metrics. So you'll want to consider, is the metric measurable? Do you have the data needed to calculate a baseline and to measure progress? What methodology will you use to measure the metric? And is that methodology sound and replicable? Do you have interim measures available to measure progress? What are those measures? Next slide, please. And then a few more considerations when setting targets. And so as you're setting targets and outcomes, it's important to consider some of the following to provide some purpose behind the targets that are set. So what is our baseline? What are some of the past trends? What level of growth is reasonable based on those past trends? And are we implementing a program or initiative or policy that can help us achieve significant progress for this metric? Next slide, please. Here is a screenshot of another resource that we've included with the materials from today to support LEAs with the development of metrics. And so this chart shows the pathway or progression for the development of a metric and includes some of the questions to consider that were shared on the previous 2 slides. And so key considerations include what metric will be used? How will the metric be measured? What is the data source? What does the baseline show? What is our 3-year target? And how will we monitor progress? And so you can see that progression with the example provided, the metric provided reclassification rate. And so again, this is a resource that we've included in the materials for today. Next slide, please. So here we see an example of a completed metric baseline, and desired outcome. In the example, the metric included is for the SBAC ELA. And for this metric, the most recent data available is from the 2018-19 SBAC. So you can also see the notation in blue that LEAs must also include a local measure to reflect the most recent data, because the 2018-19 data would not be the most recent data to measure progress in this area. For metrics not available from 2020, we recommend still including the most recent data as a placeholder in addition to your local measure, as is the case with this example. And that's because at some point the data will become available and will need to be included. So each metric should have just enough information to clearly tell what is being measured, how it is being measured, and should also tell the story of where you want to be in the next 3 years. As you're developing your metrics, another important consideration is, do the metrics align with the actions articulated in the goals? Can you draw that through line between the needs, metrics, goals, and actions? And that concludes my section. I will now turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Rachel. So in this next section, we're going to be taking a look at the process of developing clear, comprehensible actions. Next slide, please. First, we have this chart, which represents each section of the LCAP, and next to it, we see a general description of the various elements. At a high level, the LCAP comes together to describe how the LEA has evaluated its current conditions, has sought input from stakeholders, and is planning to support improved student outcomes by an allocation of resources. The LCAP is a comprehensive document, and the elements are connected and reinforce one another. That's why we keep referring to the through line. And to fully understand the LEA story, one cannot just look at one element. They're really all interconnected. Next slide. So what is the theory of action? Each LEA operates on a theory of action, even if that's not what you call it. What it is that the LEA can communicate their theory of action through their actions in the LCAP. We focus on the actions section today here because this is the heart of the LCAP. The actions section is a place where we can find descriptions for actions provided for all students, for all 8 state priority areas, as well as increase and improve services for unduplicated pupils, which are low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. Well-written actions are not just about reporting LEA's expenditures. Instead, we want to frame the LCAP as an opportunity to show that what an LEA is doing is producing equitable outcomes for students. It's important to remind ourselves about the intent of the local control funding formula and its supplemental and concentration grant funding. It was not there to provide more money. It's not there to spend more money, but rather it's really about increasing or improving outcomes for high need student groups. So it's really about equity. Therefore, the actions section is where stakeholders can get a sense for how the LEA plans to operationalize equity. What is the LEA doing for all students, and what is being done on top of that to support the needs of our low-income students, English learners, and foster youth? Next slide. So with the through line, everything should tie together with the clarity of actions and how they relate to the goals and metrics. After designing a goal and then identifying the corresponding metrics, which Rachel just went over, and those metrics will have been identified for what will effectively measure progress toward achieving that goal. Then LCAPs will focus on writing the actions for that goal. There's a strong interdependency between all 3 of these sections: the actions, the increased and improved services section, and the expenditure tables. All of these are first based on the goals as determined by the local context of your needs and priorities, as well as the required metrics to be used to help support the determination of those needs. And actually also stakeholder input, which is also another input to help determine the needs. And all of those feed into the development of the LEA's actions. This connection between all those parts of the LCAP is referred to as the idea of the through line. Next slide. So we want to get to the clarity of actions, but first let's look at the goals section at the top because all the actions are going to fall under a goal statement. The LCAP requires the LEA to explain why that goal was developed. And this could be based on analysis of dashboard or other local data or on stakeholder feedback. And with each goal, the LEA will indicate the metrics to measure progress toward that goal. Next slide. It's important to note that the LCAP requires LEAs to address all 8 state priorities and the required metrics. LEAs are not required to address each of the priorities with the same level of intensity, as LEAs may prioritize their goals. So it's just a reminder that when goals are created and actions are written, we should be looking to address all 8 state priorities. Next slide. And so to quickly review also, this slide appeared in our last presentation, just a reminder that there are 3 types of goals. A focus goal is the more concentrated goal in scope, maybe also in time, and it might be something that an LEA would consider to meet the needs of addressing an LEA's improvement status, such as differentiated assistance, or maybe even a short-term goal based on the immediate needs created by pupil learning loss during school closures. So a focus goal is something that's focused. Whereas a broad goal is one that's more general and may focus on improving performance and may encompass a wider range of metrics. And then the third type of goal that is identified in the template instructions is called the maintenance of progress goal. This is one that might be a continuing action that addresses basic services, for example, one that might help to ensure that the LEA has all teachers properly credentialed, buildings in good repair, students have textbooks. So it's what you're saying is that the current level is adequate and we're not really looking to improve specifically, but we want to maintain the current status. So that might be one that would be a goal that you would call a maintenance of progress goal. There's no place on the template to identify the type of goals you've included in your LCAP, but these definitions could be helpful in organizing your goals and subsequently your actions that fall under each of these goals. So this last slide on goals, really to recap the considerations for developing goals for your LCAP. Looking at your goals, how might you organize your plan? Will your plan consist primarily of broad goals or will you place focus goals at the forefront? How might your goals align with any other existing goals that might be branded within your district? For example, some districts like to have them aligned to other existing plans, such as their strategic plan, or make sure that it reflects their mission and vision statement. Do your goals allow for capturing all 8 state priorities? Can you articulate in your plan why each goal was developed? And what about the different types of goals you're planning? Do the set of goals allow for all required metrics to be represented in the plan? And how many goals will you have in your plan? As you know, for each goal developed, you're likely to have multiple actions to implement that will be needed to help improve outcomes related to that goal. So many of these considerations are a local decision, but the team coordinating your LCAP development process will want to consider all the possibilities with the input of stakeholders. Next slide. And then, so for the action section, next we will turn here and look at some guidance around developing clear, comprehensible actions. So with a quick look at the template, we can see the main parts. So the first part there is the short title, and that communicates the main content of the action. It may be a short title or a phrase, but then in the next larger box next to it, we have the description. And that's really where we read the who does what, for whom, and to what end. So this is the main meat of the action. And here we want to be sure we clearly articulate what and how something is going to be done in order to affect positive student outcomes. This is where we want to ask the question, is the action description written so that it is clear and comprehensive? And then, oh yes, thank you. This is the right slide now. And then the next column in the chart there, total funds and contributing columns, this connects to the expenditure tables. LEAs are not required to identify funding sources here, although the expenditure tables will require a breakdown by LCFF, other state, local, or federal funds. And then the Y will be marked in the contributing column for any actions which were developed based on the needs of low-income students, English learners, or foster youth. These contributing actions will be described further later in today's presentation as they come with some additional requirements, though for now you may want to note that the description here may also include how the action contributes to increased improved services for those students. It definitely adds clarity for the reader to understand why the action's marked yes, that it's contributing in the action section, and could be captured in the for whom when we use the sentence frame, who is doing what for whom and to what end. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that sentence frame in the next slide. Next slide, yes, here. So we're calling this the frame for developing action. So the LCAP process is intended to support continuous improvement. And the boxes on the yellow boxes represent a simplification of a district's theory of action. We believe that if we do this thing, this action that we're calling out, it will cause a visible or observable change. And that in turn will impact something critical and contribute towards some outcome or goal that we're trying to achieve. So that's a theory of action that we're working with. But the simplest way to represent this for clarity of writing actions is to focus on the sentence frame, who is doing what for whom and to what end. It's really, our team is always stating that sentence frame as we look at different actions. Those are the elements that we're really looking for, who is doing what, for whom, to what end. And so we're going to use that as we look at a few samples today. Next slide, please. So when writing actions or when you're going through your LCAP draft and continuing to make improvements along the way, keep these guiding questions by your side. So who is doing what, for whom, and to what end? And to kind of break those simple statements out a little further, we have created this bulleted list of questions. So for who at your LEA will make that action happen? Is it the administrator in charge of a specific department? Is it a specific group of staff by job responsibility? We should be able to see who is responsible for this action. And then the what will occur. Here we look for a certain level of specificity. And the one thing to keep in mind might be that if an external stakeholder was reading the action, would they be able to understand to some degree what can be expected to happen? Perhaps not to a level being able to replicate it exactly as you do, but perhaps if there should be enough detail to understand what we might expect to see from that action to impact student outcomes. And for whom, who is the action targeting? Is it an action that is going to be targeted towards all students? Or is it an action developed based on needs of a specific student group? Is it an action developed to address students with a particular need? This part of the sentence frame is critical for actions that are considered contributing to increased improved services requirement, which I know that Jeannie will cover later in some later slides. But that to whom is another element of this sentence frame. And lastly, to what end? What is it with this action that the LEA hopes to achieve? What is the outcome the action hopes to improve? And why do we believe that it will be effective? The action description should include some connection for the reader to understand the purpose of the action so that it can be tied back clearly to the metrics and outcomes and goals. Next slide. So the guiding questions to improve clarity of the written actions, we've pasted it to the right-hand side again of this slide, but we want to further illustrate that frame for action clarity. And we'll start with we wanted to provide some non-examples, which mirror some common issues we've seen in the past. And the first category of these non-examples is something that we're calling leading from expenditures. So take a moment to review these 3 bulleted non-examples and run through that sentence frame in your mind to see if you can determine how that action might need to be improved. Does it contain the elements who, does what, for whom, and to what end? And as you're looking at that, what do we see? What we see is a representation of the tendency to want to describe what is being funded rather than describing the action as what is being implemented. For example, if actions are focused on expenditures, we might see actions that lead with statements such as, we hire these staff, or we're going to purchase these items. And so one of the cautions to avoid when developing the LCAP is to develop it solely on the consideration of what is being funded. Instead, we'd want to know, what are the literacy coaches doing? What is the purpose of the learning management system? How are they being used? And for each of these actions, who is involved? Which students are being served? And what is occurring? And what can we expect as a result? So while it may seem like describing how the LEA is hiring staff or making a specific purchase may seem like a clear description of how the LEA is expending LCFF, a simple expenditure description cannot be used to describe how those staff or purchases are intended to help the LEA make progress toward the identified goal. And so that's really the issue here, is a simple statement of what's being funded. It is not the description that will provide clarity for the reader. Next slide, please. So the next category of non-examples is a caution on the point of view being used by the writer. So I believe that many of us are very aware that the use of acronyms, initialisms, and other content-specific terminology that we use in education may be confusing to outsiders. And even I have to admit that I've read some plans and I've caught myself wondering what something might mean, because we all have so many different programs out there. But it's not only that, but also taking the perspective of readers into consideration. So will an external stakeholder, a non-educator, a parent, student, other groups, understand the action as written? And also, would internal stakeholders recognize and understand the action as written? Would, for example, the action bullet there on the second bullet, would the research and evaluation department see that action and say, yes, oh yes, that's exactly what we're doing to support student achievement? Or might they say, I'm not really sure what that action represents and what we're expected to do? So really, internal stakeholders are as important as external stakeholders, and considering both perspectives would be important in this case. So in these non-examples, take a moment to see and think about what might be missing from our sentence frame, or why else the action might be problematic. I know I'm not pausing for very long, but really we do have a lot of content to cover. So we didn't quite build in the time to stop and think, but wanted to provide a moment for you to read that. So we're looking at these examples. The first bullet, if someone external to our system did not understand what MTSS was, we may be asking the question, what is MTSS? We also don't know who is implementing it here or to what end. Well, it says to meet the needs of performing students. What do we expect to accomplish with that online data management system in the second bullet? Who is involved? Who benefits from its use? Why do we need it? And in that third example, if we allocate funds to schools, what's happening with those funds? What is the actual action besides the allocation of funds? Who, what, for whom, and to what end are all absent in that action. It really doesn't say much about what is being done to support the goals and to impact the student outcomes. And then the next slide, we have a third category of non-examples. And for this last category, we're calling it the vague action. Here, the general lack of specificity inhibits the LEA's ability to tell a good story. You might see provide professional development for teachers as a $2 million action and wonder, what exactly does that all entail? Is there a professional development coordinator being funded? Are there TOSAs doing the work? Is it cost related to consultants and conferences? What is the purpose or focus of professional development? Is it PD for English learner strategies, new curriculum? There's a chance here to provide enough specificity around what is occurring, who's doing what for whom, and to what end to be able to tell the LEA story. There's a goal and there are metrics measuring progress toward that goal. And PD might be, let's say professional development might be the short title for an action supporting that goal, but how can we make the action description clear enough to the reader so that they understand who is doing what for whom and to what end, and provide the LEA has this opportunity here to really showcase what it is that they're doing to support their students. The opposite of vague, though, a note here, does not necessarily mean that we want to see overly complicated and lengthy descriptions. And the next slide will provide an example that we hope you'll find is succinct and provides all the elements of our sentence frame. So our potential example that we want to unpack. Next slide. So we spent time looking at non-examples, and that was used to help build an understanding of actions that are unclear and missing elements of a full description. And so here we unpack a sample action, one that hopefully you can use as a frame. And as you can see, the elements are color coded. The who does what for whom and to what end are not necessarily in a locked sequence. You can see here that the who is in the middle of the description. What's really important is to have all the elements. So here, the who are the program directors, as they are the ones coordinating the implementation of the action. The what, color-coded in red, is the academic counseling, mentoring, and tutoring for students, as well as an 8-week seminar for their parents. The for whom, which is color-coded in green, are the parents and students from 3 junior high schools, high school feeders, and they're focusing primarily on historically underserved populations. And to what end, which is color-coded in blue, is that it is a college access program aiming to increase success in rigorous courses. Could this action be improved a little? Maybe, but it does contain the necessary elements that lead to a clear and comprehensible action. Note that the length of this sample action is not a long action, because sometimes lots of words in action just end up making it less clear. So here we have just a simple, succinct, who does what for whom. The next slide is just a quick reference to the 3 categories of common issues we see in writing actions, and it might be something that we point to as we work with districts and reviewing drafts. So it just kind of summarizes the 3 types of common issues leading from expenditures, point of view, and vague actions. And then next slide, in these last final 2 slides, we want to present some notes about things to consider when planning your actions and writing actions. We've actually already touched on a number of these already. And so including, thank you, Bonnie, the myths and facts slides really did cover quite a number of these items in bullets that we wanted to discuss. So we'll move on to the next slide. Lastly, in the writing of actions, the key is to be clear, cohesive, and demonstrate that clear through line, connecting to the goals and outcomes. Each action written using the who is doing what for whom and to what end will help ensure clarity of actions. We also encourage reading your plan draft through the lens of stakeholders, and ensure that the language is written through an asset-based lens. And this is in transition to the next section. So I wanted to kind of use an example about what that might look like to use an asset-based lens. And so I'm going to use an extreme example, but for example, when describing the needs of families, when planning an action for parent education program, we wouldn't want to see something that was not asset-based, which might read something like, the parents do not have high education levels and lack the ability to help their children at home. But rather, from an asset-based perspective, we might describe it as the LEA is focusing on parent-school partnerships and therefore responding to the need for parents and families to have more opportunities to learn strategies for supporting their children with homework, and therefore are offering parent education courses at et cetera, et cetera. So developing actions based on needs is important to the planning process, and most especially for required descriptions for increased and improved services. So from here, I will pass it over to Adrian to go a little deeper into considerations for looking at needs, conditions, and circumstances for high need student groups.
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to cover the needs, conditions, and circumstances of low-income foster youth and English learners at your district and sites. This section is to provide an overview of the many of the needs, conditions, and circumstances of these specific student groups, but it does not attempt to comprehensively address all of the issues that these groups face. It is meant to just guide your work in developing the increased or improved services section for your low-income foster youth and English learner. The instructions for this section of increased or improved services state that when developing the goals and actions as contributing to the increased or improved services requirement, you must consider the needs, conditions, or circumstances of these students. And so oftentimes we get the question about, well, what does that mean? So CDE recommends that this is to be done through a root cause analysis. And you can find it at the link at the bottom. You can find this on the CDE webpage. And CDE recommends that when you use root cause analysis, you are looking at addressing the problem rather than just a symptom. So for example, the California School Dashboard identifies symptoms of the problem, but it doesn't necessarily address the problem that's causing those symptoms. And so this can be done through the process of root cause analysis. It's part of your needs assessment process, and it occurs after you gather and analyze the data from the needs assessment process and before you determine the actions and services that will be developed within the LCAP. And it's important to include your stakeholders in this process. And there are many resources on the CDE website of analysis tools. You can find the fishbone diagram, empathy interviews, process mapping, and many others. So this is a good place to start if you're new to this process, or if this is new with your stakeholders, to really look at addressing the causes of these problems and not addressing the symptoms only. So when looking at low-income students, if you look at it as when we ask what are the needs, conditions, and circumstances, let's take a closer look for each of these student groups. So when looking at low-income students, we're looking at what are the needs of low-income students. They need academic support, such as additional support, interventions, a place to study, homework, early learning, access to libraries. These are some of the needs of the students. What about the parents? What support do the parents need? Perhaps they need strategies to help their children, or the parent education level may affect, or they have other, needs that they need help with. There are also financial constraints, such as materials, technology, access to devices, internet. And again, this is probably above and beyond what you found out during the pandemic, because again, access to technology and devices is one of the critical pieces of the effects of the pandemic and what we've needed for all students, regardless of whether they're a low-income student or not. So again, taking a look at everything that typically low-income families have financial difficulties obtaining. Moving on to the conditions. What are the conditions of low-income students? The conditions of the students, perhaps, is that they have poor educational and health outcomes, such as unhealthy eating, physical activity, obesity, asthma, access to higher education. And then looking at the conditions of the parents. Are the parents working multiple jobs, single parent homes? And the conditions of the school, programs and attitudes of the school advisors and teachers. What is the attitude towards the low-income students, and what programs are in place? If you look at the circumstances of the low-income students, some of them are homeless, or they're in public housing, or in a foster home, or they live in distressed neighborhoods. Are the students a ward of the state or an orphan? Do they have transportation issues? Or are they exposed to alcohol and drug abuse, violence and trauma? So again, these are some of the needs, conditions, and circumstances of low-income students. Let's take a look at foster youth. And what are the needs of foster youth students? Well, they need academic, emotional, and behavioral support. Look at the IEPs. Many have IEPs for learning disabilities or emotional and behavioral issues. The need is they have a greater risk of school failure, retention, placement of grade level, missing transcripts, assessment, and attendance data. What are the conditions of the foster youth students? So we know research shows that the conditions of the students, that sometimes they experience deeper issues of anger and abuse or disempowerment. They might be diagnosed with PTSD or ADHD. And also the condition of the family. There may be weak family attachment or lack of consistent discipline. And importantly also is to look at the condition of the school. How does the school address the foster youth? How does the district address foster youth? Is there collaboration between various systems and individuals that are in charge of these students? What about school records? How is that facilitated? Or the stability of the educational placement of these students if they are mobile and they bounce around from school to school? What educational supports are in place for these students? And what kind of mentors are in place to assist these students when they need the support? And here are the circumstances for foster youth. Many have difficulty transitioning to independence. They have feelings of sadness, helplessness, hopelessness, and unsure of their future. They have difficulty feeling safe, and they experience high mobility. So again, these are some issues and some needs, conditions, and circumstances for foster youth. Now moving on to English learners. The same questions apply. What are the needs of English learners? Some English learners have difficulty in making meaningful connections among the fundamental concepts and being able to connect that to prior knowledge and experience. Some struggle to communicate, lack of oral speaking experiences. Some need additional literacy instruction, support, interventions. Some English learners need designated ELD instruction, and they need monitoring so that they are not left alone. What are the conditions of English learner students? Some students may experience feelings of anxiety, confusion, isolation when they don't have a command of the language, or they're being compared to others that do. What are the conditions of parents? Parents may not be English speakers, and they may not be able to help their children with their schoolwork. And this is probably what we do have control over, and this is the conditions that exist in the school. What does our master schedule look like? What about the teacher, some teachers' inability to differentiate? Is the school have culturally responsive instruction? Are we building on the culture and bringing that in and instead of pushing it out? What about lack of knowledge of EL strategies, and also providing equitable learning opportunities for our diverse students? And also looking at circumstances. We have to be aware that the social and emotional conditions truly influence the academic learning. And if we don't really recognize that that is a fundamental component to English learners, we're really missing on addressing the true needs of and the circumstances of English learners. So now what? What do we do with all this information? You know, this research is not intended for you to just cut and paste. It's really to be used as you take an in-depth look at the families and students in your community. Your community is unique. So if you were to place 3 pieces of chart paper on the wall, excuse me, you would then ask, what are the needs, conditions, and circumstances of our low-income foster youth and English learners? What are the specific needs in our community? And so this is for you, you know, the work that is ahead of you, and really needs to have a deeper, in-depth look at this. So we definitely wanted to bring this to the forefront. And now Jeannie is going to go more in depth with the increased or improved services section of the LCAP.
Before we go ahead, I'd just like, first of all, thank you, Adrian, for doing all that work in looking at and researching the information regarding those 3 groups and the needs. I did want to go back to, maybe you can help on that one, because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding on the IEPs. What, as I recall, you found was that along with other records, were often lost for those students in the transition as they move from school to school. So this doesn't imply that addressing an IEP is a need, it's a basic need, and that's because of their disability. But the fact that the transition causes records to be lost is a need related to that particular group. Does that reflect what you found in the research, Adrian?
Yes, I did, Bonnie. Thank you for pointing that out. Definitely, not only do students have IEPs, but they definitely get lost in the mobility of a student, and or they don't catch up in time. And so the students suffer because they don't get the specific modifications or needs addressed.
Thanks, Adrian. I think that's a really good example of how that gets confused. What's the need based on a disability, which they're a student with a disability, and their needs for their IEPs? That's a basic core responsibility. But the fact that records get transferred, and those may be related to that, that's a need specific to them as foster youth that wouldn't be a general need. So a
Correct.
fine line, but something worth, that's a great example of how that's confusing sometimes. So thanks so much, Adrian, appreciate it. I'll turn.
You're welcome.
To Jeannie.
And now,
thank you, everyone, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to address the increased and improved services section. So if you'd advance the slide, thank you. Perfect. So in the increased and improved services section, this is about how the LEA is operationalizing equity for their low-income students, English learners, and foster youth. The section is grounded in the LCFF funding formula, which provides increased funding for LEAs to use to address the unique needs of these 3 student groups. The funding formula is codified in the LCFF spending regulations, which identify the requirements for LEAs to increase or improve services. These requirements are articulated in the California Code of Regulations and articulated in the instructions for this section. LCFF maintains the intent of former categorical programs to support equity, and it provides flexibility for LEAs to reflect on how to best meet the needs of their ELs, low income and foster youth. Next slide, please. Here, the purpose for this section is included in the instructions. Key to the purpose is where stakeholders can find a comprehensive description within a single dedicated section of how the LEA plans to increase or improve services for its unduplicated pupils as compared to all students, and how the LEA has determined any school-wide or district-wide use of funds will intentionally provide services to address the needs of the student groups for which the increased funding is being provided. To be meaningful for stakeholders, these descriptions in this section should provide sufficient information so that stakeholders can provide input. And key to this section is that the descriptions here align to the actions and related expenditures the LEA identified as contributing to the requirement to increase or improve services for English learners, low income, and foster youth. Next slide, please. Title V regulations are the basis for the requirement for LEAs to adhere to the expenditure regulations for the use of supplemental and concentration grants. 5 CCR 15496 provides the requirement for LEAs to demonstrate increased or improved services for unduplicated pupils in proportion to the additional funding the LEA receives for these students in the LCAP year. Per these regulations and the related instructions included in the new LCAP template, LEAs are required to provide evidence in the LCAP to demonstrate how this funding, apportioned on the basis of the number and concentration of unduplicated pupils, is being used to support these pupils in the LCAP year. Next slide, please. This section, as I stated, aligns with the LCFF spending regulations. Here, the LEA identifies the amount and related proportional increase in funds the LEA receives for the LCAP year, based on their number and concentration of the unduplicated pupil groups. The calculation for proportionality identifies the percentage by which services for unduplicated pupils must be increased or improved above services provided to all pupils in this LCAP year. This is determined by using the LCFF calculation or FICMAT calculator, which divides the amount of the increased apportionment by the remainder of the LEA's LCFF funding. This calculation results in the proportional increase in funding LEAs receive to increase or improve services for their ELs, low income, and foster youth. Per spending requirements, this funding shall be used to increase or improve services for unduplicated pupils as compared to services provided to all pupils in proportion to the increase in funds apportioned for the supplemental and concentration grant. Next slide, please. While the proportionality calculation and the amount for the increased apportionment are precise, collaboration needs to occur among fiscal and program personnel to ensure that funding being used and described in the increased and improved services section is intended for the student groups and can be tracked in each LCAP year. The LEA has an obligation to increase or improve services annually, at least in proportion to the increased funding. Next slide, please. So this first prompt, there's 2 description prompts in this section. And this first prompt connects directly to the actions the LEA has identified as contributing to the increased or improved services requirement in the goals and actions section, and that will be provided either to an entire school or across the entire LEA. There is often confusion about the descriptions required in this section, and some of that may come from only responding to the broad ideas in the prompt and not the specificity in the instructions. The prompt indicates that the section will provide an explanation for each contributing school-wide and LEA-wide action about how the needs of foster youth, ELs, and low-income students were considered first, and how the actions are effective in meeting the goals for these students. While that is the overall concept, the prompt does not articulate how an LEA must explain that a contributing school-wide action or a district-wide action is principally directed and effective as defined in the California Code of Regulations and included in the instructions. So let's look closely at the instructions. Key to the information in the instructions is that the description in this section applies to each school-wide or district-wide action that the LEA identified as contributing to meeting the increased or improved services requirement. Next, for each of these actions, the LEA must explain how it is principally directed and effective. The instructions reflect the spending regulations where they explain how to do this in 3 steps. First, the LEA needs to explain how the action considers the needs, conditions, or circumstances of its unduplicated pupils. Next, how the action is based on these considerations, and next, how the action is intended to help achieve an expected measurable outcome for the goal. When the actions have been planned with forethought in response to what the LEA has learned about the needs, conditions, and circumstances of each of their unduplicated pupil groups, this section will be easy to explain the process for how the LEA determined the needs, conditions, or circumstances of an intended student group, then how they designed their action, and determined that providing that action on a school-wide or district-wide basis would principally address or intentionally focus on those needs, and how the action is intended to help achieve an expected outcome for the intended student group in the related goal. Let's take a look at the 3 components required to explain how an LEA-wide contributing action is principally directed and effective. This visual breaks out the components for demonstrating how a contributing LEA-wide or school-wide action is principally directed towards and effective in meeting the goals for its unduplicated pupils. This frame can be helpful as LEAs are designing their action and could be used with stakeholders during the development of the LCAP. Next slide, please. We're going to take a look at a description for a contributing action that addresses the needs of low-income students. Let me give you a moment to read it to yourself. This description first explains that 1/3 of the LEA's students in poverty have faced one or more of the 10 traumas measured by the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And from their outreach with low-income parents, students, and their teachers, the LEA learned that many low-income students and their families are struggling with trauma they have experienced during school closures. The next component addresses how the action is based on what the LEA learned about the trauma their low-income community faces. In response to the trauma facing students and their families in the low-income communities, this LEA plans to increase clinical social workers at their wellness center to provide social and emotional support. And the LEA plans to provide professional development to improve the staff's understanding of trauma and how to improve their learning environments so that they can be more safe and supportive. Additionally, the description connects to how the LEA will use and expect student surveys to reflect an increased sense of safety and connectedness to supportive adults at the school. Let's take a look at another wide description. Next slide, please. Take a moment to read the action quickly to yourself. And in this illustration, there's a description for a contributing action that addresses the needs, conditions, and circumstances of low-income students that is being provided school-wide at 3 of the district's highest poverty schools. The description first explains that enrollment data and input from low-income parents and their teachers identified that many low-income students need to build foundational literacy because they haven't attended preschool and or kindergarten. And many of these families lack access to high-interest print and virtual materials and opportunities for reading at home. And so in this description, okay, we can see that the action is going to respond to the students who have not been able to attend preschool or kindergarten, and that the reading specialists are going to develop lessons with classroom teachers. Okay? And we can see that the instruction is going to be provided collaboratively, where the reading specialists and the teachers are both going to be providing instruction that addresses concepts of print, fluency, phonemic awareness, and comprehension strategies. And finally, in the last section, we see what the LEA expects to achieve through this action and the intended outcome, and that the low-income students would increase the concepts of print, reading fluency, etc., as you see listed in the action. And this would be measured through, and I put blank, assessments and teacher observation, because this might be a local measure, and the LEA would need to define how they would be measuring their progress to address developing literacy through this action. And this again would be a school-wide action at 3 low-income schools. Next slide, please. In the instructions, I wanted to bring to your attention that they continue to also address enrollment at LEAs where there is less than 55% unduplicated pupils. So in the case that an LEA was including an LEA-wide action and they had less than 55% unduplicated pupils, the instructions indicate that the response must also describe how the actions are the most effective use of the increased funding to meet the goals for unduplicated pupils. And this response must include how the LEA determined the actions are most effective. And it indicates this could be done by including alternatives considered, supporting research, or educational theory. And the same additional description must be provided if the LEA is describing a contributing action that they are providing school-wide, where the enrollment at the school is less than 40% unduplicated pupils. This higher bar for the description requires the LEAs to explain how their action is intentionally addressing the needs of the unduplicated pupils and how it really is the most effective for their unduplicated pupils. Next slide, please. The instructions for the prompt also include that for any wide actions that the LEA is continuing into the 21-24 LCAP from the prior LCAP, that the LEA must determine whether or not the action was effective. And this determination must reflect evidence of outcome data or actual implementation to date. So this new component in the instructions is requiring the LEAs to connect the effectiveness of their prior year actions for actions they are including in their LCAP in the upcoming year. Okay? And you can see the three scenarios. Okay? If your action, if you had data that supported that it was effective, okay, you may include that same data and rationale in your description. Okay? Perhaps you found something that wasn't effective, but you made changes to that action. Okay? So you may consider moving forward a revised action. And action number 3 in the sample is, you found out that this action really didn't yield the results for your unduplicated pupils that you expected. So you wouldn't include that action. Next slide, please. You may have noticed also on the slide with the instructions for this section that the instructions note 2 types of descriptions that are not sufficient. The red box includes this part of the instructions. Conclusory statements claim an outcome will occur without explaining what will occur that will cause an outcome. While it makes sense that a conclusory statement draws unfounded conclusions, this has been added to the instructions for clarity in the new template. Additionally, the instructions state that LEAs that have, just stating that an LEA has a high unduplicated enrollment percentage does not explain how services are principally directed and effective for a specific unduplicated pupil group. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of what we've discussed and what to include in prompt 1. Remember, prompt 1 is addressing the school-wide and LEA-wide actions the LCAP has included as contributing to the increased or improved services requirement. Let's go on to prompt number 2. Below prompt number 2, you can see the instructions, and bolded in the instructions are some of the key ideas. Okay? This prompt applies to all actions the LEA identifies as contributing in their LCAP. Key to this requirement is that the description explains how these actions taken collectively are increasing the quantity of service and or improving the quality of service for the LEA's unduplicated students as compared to what the LEA is providing for all students. Just listing the actions included here or the amount being spent does not explain how the contributing actions included in the plan improve quality of service or increase quantity of service for the intended student groups as compared to what is provided for all students. Sometimes there is confusion here that this description applies to all of the contributing actions in the LCAP goals and actions, since the LEA has just written about their wide actions. Okay? It clearly states in the instructions that this applies to every action included in your plan. So it'd be actions limited or school-wide or LEA-wide actions. And on the next slide, to illustrate this connection and bring this section to a close, you can see the connection to the expenditure tables. you can see where actions identified as contributing in the actions section of the template have additional information in the expenditure table, which indicates if the action is district-wide, school-wide, the specific location of the action, and the unduplicated pupil group that is receiving an increase in service or an improvement in service. And this information must all align to the two descriptions in the increased or improved services section. And moving to the last slide, a few cautions to remind you of. Here in this section, the state has received multiple uniform complaints. Much of it has to do with actions not being clear or clustering all unduplicated pupils together, as Bonnie discussed at the beginning of the presentations, and actions and related expenditures not reflecting a focus on each of the unduplicated pupil groups, or descriptions for wide actions not clearly linked to the unique needs, conditions, and circumstances of the student groups, or not including a connection to the outcome the LEA expects from implementing the action. And so with that, we provide these cautions for you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Evan to do a live demo for the LCAP.
Thanks, Jeannie. And for those of you who possibly didn't see the note in the chat, we apologize. We realize it's already 4:30 and many of you have places to be. But we are going to continue with the live update, and just know that we're recording this. We'll have the recording posted by tomorrow. In addition, this is the documentation and directions for the LCAP. There are documentation directions, excuse me, for the rollover process already uploaded. I hope to have a quick start guide for the overall LCAP system available within the next 48 hours, just trying to clean up all the screenshots and everything to make sure it's accurate. But all those will be available on our website too, so you don't have to stick around. But yeah, now I'm going to give a quick overview of the LCAP system. And just a couple of reminders. The LCAP system is free, which is a nice note, I think, to note. And last year, they haven't restated it, but last year as we were preparing for the first submission of this new 3-year LCAP template, the CDE repeatedly noted that an online system is actually the preferable way to go about building your LCAP. And we're not the only system out there. The CDE has their own system, and there are private vendors also who provide these services. But the CDE actually does not recommend using the template itself because it doesn't cross-reference. So I think there's some advantages that you'll see as I provide some insights about how the system works that are advantageous if you're a user of an electronic system. One other note, last year we were right in the middle of transitioning between our legacy LCAP, ELCAP system and our new ELCAP system that you're seeing right now. And I will drop into the legacy ELCAP system, but I'll wait until the end for that because I know if you're only going to be uploading to this system, it would be helpful for you to see how that process goes. All LEAs, charters, and districts in LA County will need to upload their plan if they're not building it in the system. So I wanted to make sure everybody knows how to do that. So I've already logged in. This is our ELCAP home screen, and I've already logged into the home page. If you're brand new here, the first thing you'll have to do is create an account. And right now you're seeing my account. I'm not going to walk through the steps for logging in, but there's a register button. It's very straightforward. Once you get in, you'll see this screen. And once you're in, the first step you want to do is click on Manage Plans. Now, in my case, and in many of your cases, there's going to be a plan there. And that's because if you had started a plan last year before the LCAP was canceled, we actually carried it over. Any of the work you did, there are changes to the formatting of the plan, some of the language, including some of the dates on the tables, but really nothing much changed. So we didn't want to have people start from scratch. So we carried over all your plan information. And you can start with that plan if you'd like, but if you didn't start it last year, you can always just go to add new plan. And I'm just going to show that sample here. That will appear for everybody when you first start if this table is empty. So add new plan really opens this pop-up box, and everyone, regardless of whether you're building your LCAP inside our system, or if you're just going to be uploading a PDF from another system, you'll need to fill out this page. And basically it's asking you for a plan title, the plan cycle, which is 21-24, and then the plan year. Once you select the cycle, you have the option 21-22, obviously, and then the LEA contact information. There also is this functionality which you would fill out, which you would use later if you're just uploading a plan. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to show you a sample of once you're in a plan. So after you create the plan, the first thing it'll do is take you right to this page. This is our plan index page, and this is where everything starts from. And the annual update this year, if you're a prior ELCAP user, and really anybody, it's going to be a process of uploading a PDF to the system from an outside source. So for those of you who created a learning continuity plan, and this is, I think, almost everybody, unless you're a doc tracking user, you probably use the Word document that the CDE provided. Unfortunately, that was not automated or in any online system. So you're going to have to actually use the learning continuity plan annual update template and transfer over that data. And then you'll upload that PDF. If you are an LCAP user, ELCAP user, you're going to go to the legacy system, which I'll show you in a minute. You're going to create your annual update there, and you're going to upload that here. There may be some people who are transferring over. I've talked to a few LEAs who are interested in transferring over to our system. And if you were using another system prior to now, you can actually probably complete your annual update pieces in that system, save it as a PDF, and then upload it here. So that's the annual update part. To navigate the system, you have a couple options. You can either always go back to the plan index, which is this funky little icon up at the top, or you can click on the sections at the top. I'm just going to go back to the plan index, and the title page you already completed. I'm going to go right to the data entry for the goals, actions, and budget, so you can see an example. So you have 5 different sections. There's the goal section, which is where you'll enter the goals, measuring and reporting results, which I'll dive into in a second, which is your metrics, your actions, and then the goal analysis. The nice thing, you don't have to fill this out for this year. This is relevant in the next year when you will go back. It's built into the plan moving forward, but the goal analysis doesn't have to be completed this year. This is part of the annual update that you'll be providing with the 2019-20 LCAP in a different system. And then finally, there's a budget summary. This is actually automatically generated. There's nothing to input here. So when you get started with the new goal, and I'm going to just show you the one that I created here, it's pretty straightforward. The system, you'll click on add a new goal. The system automatically generates a number for the goal. You'll give a brief goal description. This is kind of your big goal statement. And then the explanation of why the LEA developed this goal. And so I actually borrowed as a sample from what Amy was presenting earlier, the action that she presented earlier. You will have the option when you've created a couple goals that if you wish to transfer, to move your goals around, this table, you can change the order of goals within the table. So for the measuring and reporting results, I added some goals here already. It's a pretty straightforward process in terms of opening up another pop-up box. You can expand the window so you can see everything. That's going to be important, especially when you start adding student groups, which we highly recommend for each of your metrics. But I'm going to give you an example of a goal or some metrics that I created. So in this case, I chose as a metric one of the required metrics, which is the college and career indicator from the California School Dashboard. Now, interestingly, this is, although the dashboard wasn't available, this metric was still available because it was the 11th graders who took the CASP last year, or 2019. So this metric is available. It's not on the dashboard, it's in DataQuest. And so when I went in, I actually added the percentage of students prepared. That's my goal. And I had this is our baseline data. I included up here in the metric the date that it was added. And then you skip these 3 years because these are the outcomes you'll fill out each subsequent year as you get your actual results in. And then I put my desired outcome for 2023-24 down in the final box. And so with any of these actions, I can actually I'll back out and show you in a minute. I can actually see what they look like in the page when I'm back in the plan index. There's a view feature that'll allow you to see what things look like. Finally, as an action, here's a sample of an action. And I think this is one of the value addeds that we provide. If you're a charter school who's using their LCAP as their SIPSA, you'll really appreciate this feature. So here's our short action title, and here's our description of the action, and you'll recognize it from earlier in the presentation. And what we'll need to do moving forward is I need to identify the student groups who are going to be identified, who the student groups who this targets. And this is all student groups. This isn't simply your unduplicated pupil groups. And you can see I've got all of my student groups here. And if we need to modify this in some way to add additional student groups that we may not have included here, please let us know. We can add more student groups to the plan. The time span is an open entry. You can put anything you want here. It could be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year plan. And then if you are identifying this as an unduplicate or as an action for contributing to increased or improved services, you're going to need to specify the unduplicated student group or groups that are being targeted. And these should align with the student group sections above. Now, this reflects, by the way, the expenditure tables, and we won't get to those today, but this is based on the construction of the expenditure tables. So we actually kind of incorporated our goals, action, services, the model that the LCAP expenditure tables took. So if you have this marked as a contributing action, you'll want to identify scope, you'll want to identify the location, specific schools or all schools, specific grade spans, and then you get into the budget. Here's the value added piece. If you are a charter or a single school district using this LCAP as your SIPSA, we provide an opportunity to mark your specific categorical funds also here. You're not required to put in your categorical funds, but if you're using this as your LCAP, you definitely want to pull those out. And the option we have mentioned elsewhere would be to have a separate spreadsheet that you upload, but for us, you could actually enter it right here. So you can start entering your SIPSA aligned actions in here as well. And I won't show you all the calculations here in this time, but I'll present this a more detailed approach in a later video that we upload. So I'm going to back out. I just want to show you as an example. There is this link here. You can see we have a goal 1 preview, and this will just give you a sense of what that looks like on the page and how it will print out. So this has not been completed. This goal hasn't been printed, but you will see that we can get a sense of what it will look like on the page when it's printed. It's generated here. So you can see this is what the final product is going to look like when you generate it. So just to give you a quick preview of that. You can see that there's all the sections for plan summary, the comprehensive support and improvement, if you're an LEA that's at a school identified for comprehensive support and improvement, stakeholder engagement. These are all just open text boxes. We do have the option to upload files, a JPEG file, if you have any images you want to add. But that's pretty much it for now for all the pieces you'll need for completing the LCAP. I want to go back to for those of you who are using the ELCAP, if you're a legacy ELCAP user, which means you are using the ELCAP system to actually create your 2019-20 LCAP, I want to show you just very briefly how to roll over your plan. I clicked on that link. It's the link on the splash page will take you to our legacy system. And you'll see once you get there, a link that says roll over 2017-20 year 3 plan. That's your prior year LCAP. And basically, you're going to enter new information on this page, and you're going to highlight. It's going to give me an error message here, but I just want to show you after you enter your LEA contact information and click on the appropriate year, you want to make sure you get the right plan. It's going to only pull samples from the 2019-20 LCAP pool. So most of you would only have one, but you could have had a couple of drafts. Some people like to do that. Make sure you get the right one. You'll enter the information, click on that, and it'll automatically roll it over. And it'll take you, I'll just show you what it looks like after it gets there, to an existing plan. And the existing plan has a table, and we'll have additional information for those of you who probably it's been a few years since you've used the annual update, or sorry, the old ELCAP system. But navigating and getting information entered is the same as it always was. There's less information to enter now. The annual update eliminated the actual actions feature. You'll recognize the manage actual outcomes. These are the metrics from prior years where you can enter the details from each of your metrics. And when you're finished with this process, you'll save this as a PDF and upload it later. And I will give you more detailed instructions. I just wanted to give you a brief overview for today, but that is all. And if you have other questions, one other thing I wanted to note, if you are a new user, and this probably affects some of you, if you're a new user, you came on board, but your LEA was using the ELCAP for prior years and you don't have access, please reach out to us and we'll make sure you have an account set up in the system so you'll be able to access prior years. Also, I didn't show you the add new feature factor. Let me jump back to that really quick. For any plan that you have, you want to be able to add new users, and so you can have multiple users on the same plan. So all you would do is enter an email. When you hit the search feature, it's going to give you an option to give them permissions, and you add them. If it's someone who's in our system already, has registered, they'll automatically pop in. If it's somebody who's new, they'll get an email automatically generated, sent to their account that'll let them know that they've been added to the plan. So you can have as many users as you need. So you can have your fiscal people on board. You can have other program people who can help you complete the LCAP. It should be a team process. So that's it for now. And let me jump back. Adrian, do you want to pop back to the question category? I just want to remind everyone, if you have additional questions for us, please drop them in the chat. We'll keep the chat open for a while. We will send out a follow-up Q&A with all your answers to all your questions within 48 hours. The video recording of this I'll get up by tomorrow afternoon on our LCAP webpage. And if you have any specific questions for your specific coordinator, please reach out to them. But we thank you for joining us today, and we thank you for your patience. I see it's 4:48, so we went a little bit over. Sorry about that, but stay safe.